Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So today we're going to talk about VR and 360. My name is Kevin Buffitt. I'm the Director of Video Strategy for Global News. And we have a phenomenal panel of guests with us here today. To my right, we have Patrick Dell, who is the Senior Video Editor from the Globe and Mail. Anita Lee, who is the Media Innovation Editor at Discourse Media. Then Saleem Khan, who is the founder of JOVRNALISM. That's JOVRNALISM. And next to Saleem is Nathan Griffiths, who's the interactive editor at the Associated Press. And on the end is Paul Cheung, who is the director of visual journalism for NBC News. So I just wanted to take a quick poll in the room. How many people have watched a 360 video? How many people have tried a headset and done VR? Well, that's good.
Good to see.
I should mention, by the way, we are streaming to my Facebook page live in 360 right now. So you can experience all through that if you want as well. So I just wanted to start off and just show a quick example of some of the videos that are being done. This one was actually done by Nathan and the Associated Press.
Nimrud was the second capital of the Assyrian Empire and is considered one of the largest cities of ancient Mesopotamia. Assyrian queens were buried here, and their tombs have been considered a rich source of evidence for archaeologists. Fragments of sculptures and reliefs are almost all that remains now, scattered across the site by bulldozers and explosives. This is all that remains of the northern entrance to the throne room. The winged figures known as Lamassu have been digitally recreated to appear in their former positions near the now demolished doorway. Lamassu were thought to be symbols of cosmic power and could block evil spirits from entering cities or temples. Lamassu had 5 legs, so that from the front they appear to be standing, and when viewed from the side they appear to be walking. In this way, it was felt that their supernatural and protective powers would be visible from both views. This is what remains of the throne room, the main reception room of the Northwest Palace. The throne itself would have been located at the east end of the room, under what is now a large pile of rubble. The large relief against the wall is one of only 2 in the entire palace, both located in this room. It shows an unusual tree-like object, flanked by images of the king and a pair of winged guardians. The exact meaning of the tree in the center of the relief is unknown. Some scholars have speculated that it represents a date palm orchard, the surrounding flower-like objects representing palm trees being irrigated by the wavy lines extending from the central column. You're standing in what was a long, rectangular room that archaeologists believe was one room of a 2-part reception suite. As in other rooms of the palace, you can see the broken fragments of the reliefs scattered across the ground, exposing the brick walls underneath. Look on either side of the doorway closest to you, and you'll see a pair of winged figures with their backs to each other. The genies, as they are sometimes known, were intended to give power to the king or to assist in ritual activities and can be found throughout the palace. Beside the winged figure on the right is a relief representing the king, identified by his conical cap and the bow held in his left hand, symbolizing authority. He holds a ceremonial bowl and faces an attendant, who clears the air with a whisk and holds a ladle for refilling the king's royal bowl.
So I think where we're going to start out today is that there's a pretty common misconception that when you use the term 360 and you hear VR, that a lot of people think it's the same thing. But it's not the same thing. So whoever on the panel wants to address it, what is the difference between 360 and VR?
It's on. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So 360 is typically capture of reality, whether it's photo or video. And VR, virtual reality, if you're going to be technical about it, is a completely constructed digital environment. So the closest thing that I think most people might have experienced in this room might be a video game where you're in the first person. But there's a whole spectrum between 360 capture and true VR, which has full interactivity. So even the video games that you may have experienced do not actually technically qualify as full VR, because full VR has physical motion and interactivity and even a sense of touch, or haptics as it's called.
So is it all about the head-mounted display? Does it have to be something you're wearing on your head for it to be considered VR?
I mean, VR has become this sort of catch-all bucket term for everything now. And so, it's kind of like the word blog or, any of these other new terms that come up. It goes out there and people run with it. And so I wouldn't get too hung up on the terminology, except if you're, speaking about it in a technical sense and you're actually trying to produce something, then it becomes a lot more relevant. But for the general public, they don't really care. It's you can call it VR, you can call it 360, whatever you want. I don't know how anyone else feels about that.
I think you're right that much like the fight against vertical video, sometimes you just got to go with it. And if people are going to call it VR, then that's what they're going to call it. But just to add a little tidbit to what you're saying, Saleem, is there's someone from Google, and I can't remember his name, but some very smart person at Google that I think said that in his mind, VR comes to you, like it's an environment that comes to you, and the difference is augmented reality, to differentiate that, is something that then takes you somewhere. It's like a layer on the experience you already have.
Yeah, I see AR as an overlay of virtual overlay onto the real world, and basically the virtual overlay does not interact with the real life content. So it's basically an overlay of real world content, but they don't interact with each other. And that's the difference in AR? Sorry, augmented reality.
I did like the video you just showed, Kevin, that it included elements of augmented reality in 360 video. It was really nicely done.
I would actually go a step further than that, though. Who here listens to music when they're out working out or riding their bike or whatever? Right? A lot of people. Technically, that's augmented reality because you're adding something to your experience of the real world, and you might be using some kind of, maybe you're using a workout app that guides you. So, augmented reality is a lot more than just the visual sphere. And that's something that people tend to forget when we're talking about immersive experiences, is that the audio is actually often a key element of that. And I would guess that both of you might have something to say about that.
I just think don't get hung up on semantics. None of it really matters to the user, right? I think it's really thinking about what kind of experience are you illustrating and what kind of technology is required to experience this story. Sometimes you could do it with a browser by just swiping the content. Sometimes it requires a headset, right? Sometimes it requires a headset and a earphone, right? So I think, without getting tripped up on the semantics, because you're just going to have these very philosophical, theoretical debate whether you should get into it or not. And I think that's like the technology terms become a barrier for you to try it. So I think, for me, I think about it as what kind of experience you want to produce and what type of technology do you require the user to experience this as a easy way to sort of like democratize, what you're doing.
Well, and on that point, Paul, so I think that's a good place to go to, which is from the production standpoint, because I think that's been a barrier, especially in Canada, and understanding the level of production you need to get into this, that I think people look at this that, I got to produce something for a headset, and I can't just, get a $200 camera like this and get into VR and 360. So can you guys talk a little bit about, how you produce, how, and the level of production that you use, and some of the pros and cons of the different types of production you're using?
Yeah, I think when we think about producing 360 of VR journalism, immediately a lot of people think these big projects, right? Because when you think about what's being publicized is, these documentary-like features from New York Times, from news, from PBS and whatnot. And in fact, you could do everything very low scale, right? Even without any camera, any fancy camera. If you have an Android phone, you could actually download an app called Google Cardboard Camera. And with that, you could produce a nice, viable 360 photo that you could upload to Facebook.
With audio, actually. It captures audio as well.
So it's equally pleasing for the user, right? And this is just with your phone, so you don't even need to buy anything, right? So that's your lowest entry point of producing some sort of 360 content. And from there, you could scale up. And right now, I would say, for the past 12 months, you see a whole slew of consumer-grade camera that costs anything from, $150 all the way up to thousands and thousands of dollars, for you to produce all sorts of different types of videos and experiences. And then if you have developer resources, then you could do even more with it. So I would just sort of think about, think about what is it that you want to produce and what type of resources that you could manage. Do not go for, my recommendation is, when I was at the AP, Nathan could attest to it, is our first experience, we made it super complicated for ourselves. We try to do something super technical that's beyond our wheelhouse. And then from there, we just wait, we need to come down a lot and do something that we could manage. And then from there on, we were able to scale back up again. So don't try to shoot for the, 15-minute long, 360 video where you get to choose and have all these vibration. If you have the resources and tons of money to do it, great. If you don't, focus on what is it that you could achieve right now.
Yeah, and I would say, sorry, I think one of the most, so we started out, we made a full VR experience. It was submitted through the Oculus Store. It worked out great, but it was a ton of work. And at the end of the day, we thought, well, that doesn't fit in a newsroom workflow at all. That's totally impractical. So we scaled back. I spent a lot of time figuring out kind of what's the type of technology and what's the type of stories and things like that work within a more realistic time frame for news. And we settled on using cameras like we have here, like what I basically call point and shoots, right? They're a couple $100. You can pick them up. Probably someone in your office has one at this point in time.
Yeah, that's a Kodak Pix Pro, and you get two of them, and it's $180
for one,
and it's about $1,000.
Or even, and so the new gear, there's a new gear coming out that's like $250. That's US. I don't know what the price will be here, but the most important part of this is that all the lessons you learn on the low end, on the easily accessible consumer stuff, those lessons are all still valid on high end equipment, right? Mm-hmm. There's going to be additional things to learn, but there's no point in going out and if you're learning to do something, you don't go out and buy the most expensive, well, maybe someone does, but you shouldn't probably go and buy the most expensive piece of equipment out there. You learn on something cheap, you figure out how it works, what are the lessons, what's the workflow look like, and all those lessons are going to apply as you decide to upgrade, or if you decide to upgrade.
Well, and can everybody speak to it? What are the lessons? Because one of the things I think, we see a lot of is that I think there's a fearfulness of getting into this because it is completely unlike shooting anything else. It's not like going out and taking a standard camera and going and shooting video. It is unlike anything else. Where you shoot it, how you shoot it. So what are the lessons to be learned when you get into this?
I think it's actually a fascinating medium because you don't really think like a journalist, you think more like a UX designer, because a lot of VR videos are user-driven narratives as opposed to journalist-driven narratives because they get to decide where they want to move and go, whereas like a typical traditional 2D video, obviously the journalist is, or the editor or the producer is driving where the audience is, what the audience is observing next. So it's kind of thinking about just anticipating your viewer's next move, I guess, or what would be most compelling to them.
Yeah, I've found, there's the classic take a viewer somewhere where they wouldn't normally be able to go. Those are great use cases. Give them, or take them somewhere where they might go, but give them an angle or an experience that they wouldn't otherwise get. We did a piece in some hot air balloons. Went riding in hot air balloons, and you got to hang out over the edge of the balloon in the video, which provided for a pretty interesting perspective. And also one of the approaches I think is probably the most underutilized is telling very compelling personal stories, because the camera, when you're watching it, if you're using a headset to a lesser degree on your phone or on the web, but still to some degree, the camera is effectively like where you're standing, right? So you have this, you feel like you're in this place. If I had the camera pointed here, then it would like you guys are all looking at me. But when you've got characters, they speak. You don't do the typical talking off to the reporter off to the side of the camera, you have characters speak right into the camera. Then when you're watching the video later, that person's speaking directly to you. You're making eye contact with that person. That does a really remarkable job of kind of tricking you into thinking like you're actually getting this really personal insight from these characters, right? So I found that you can actually tell some very, very compelling personal stories. One of the best I saw was, I think it was done by Scripps. It was very, very, very low budget. Wasn't even 4K. It was just a handheld camera that they shot with. And they accompanied this woman. She was going back to her house after the floods in the I don't even remember where, somewhere in the southern U.S. after some flooding. She was on a boat, and you're on a boat. She's basically narrating her trip back to their house. I don't know what I'm going to see here. I haven't been in my house for 2 weeks. You know, when I left, the water was up to here and blah, blah, blah. And then she walks you in through her house. And after, I mean, it was 1:45, maybe 2 minutes. But after this time, you felt like, Jesus, this woman's got like this amazing story. And you had this really very almost bizarre, you know, when you think about it, a little bit bizarre connection, you know, that been being talked at, really, by this woman on the camera. But because she's looking at you and because you're of the proximity where you can feel like you're sitting next to her in the boat or you're standing next to her in the house, it does a remarkable job of really bringing that to a kind of a much more personal level, or a feeling of a more personal level.
Right. A big part of the reason for that, though, is the brain science. When you're immersed in an experience, your brain doesn't respond to it as if you're looking at a screen, or, you know, same as you might be reading a book or something like that. Your brain, the part of your brain that's active, is the experiential part of your brain. So it's actually like you're in reality. It doesn't matter what the fidelity or the resolution of the experience is. You could even have, you know, a generated experience with 2 stick figures, and your brain would interpret that as real. So that's a big part of why people form a really strong connection or bond to these experiences. And on that point, it's actually also important to remember when you're creating these experiences, who it is that you're both speaking with, but also who's creating these experiences. You know, we've had a lot of discussion in Canada in the last few weeks about inclusion and diversity, and who is creating these experiences, as well as who the subjects are, plays very much into the kinds of interactions and the interpretation that results. So that's something to keep in mind.
Have you guys remembered the movie Being John Malkovich?
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about a 360 video, it's like being John Malkovich. Like you're trapped in this person's point of view. You really don't have control. You sort of have to, I mean, the only control, you could look all around, but it's still tell from that person. So I think what it does in this medium is create that sense of intimacy that otherwise you couldn't achieve through regular format. So I think it's that sense of one-to-one relationship that established the connection. Some of the lessons learned that we have is a little bit more internal, right? I think immediately when you think about 360 video, who do you think are the people who's going to do it? Right, so a lot of people tend to think like, oh, maybe we need to train our videographers. In fact, we actually find that it doesn't matter what discipline you have, whether you're a reporter or a photographer or videographer, basically anyone could learn how to shoot 360. So separating the shooting and the post-production is important because the shooting part is really about the storytelling. These cameras might look really fancy, but they actually are very limited. There's a lot of things they couldn't do. It really, I mean, think about the camera as like a really fussy baby, right? You can't zoom with it. You can't play with this aperture. They're delicate to temperatures, and you have to care for it. The battery going to run out, so you have to recharge. It's like feeding your kid, right? So if you think about these cameras, actually, it look really high tech, but it's not very high tech. And there's not a whole lot you could really do but just turn it on and like hide from it.
And the more complex you make the production, as you were saying, if you go into the route of getting, the Odyssey, which is 16 GoPros, is that what it is?
Yeah.
All daisy chained together.
It looked like
one of those are recording,
like
and you have to ingest each one of those. So it can be incredibly labor intensive.
Yeah.
The stitching on those kind of productions is ridiculous, and that's one of the benefits of the consumer-grade cameras is they typically come with software that's optimized for that camera. So in the case of the Samsung Gear 360 we were talking about, and the Theta like Saleem and I've got, it's literally drag and drop. You throw your files in and it'll spit out clips that are then ready to be edited. So if you have a established video post-production workflow, it's really easy to drop that into what you already do.
Right, and to that point, I mean, I've used those cameras on breaking news events where we'll go out and shoot for like 2 hours an event, come back, drop the footage into a quick stitch, like run it through the built-in software, and then do an edit. And I have an edit out the end of the day, or well, very late in the end of the day, let's say, or the following day. So I mean, there's a fairly serious gulf in terms of what you're able to do in a news workflow with a higher end camera, right? With an expensive camera that contains half a dozen or more little mini cameras. But if you're talking about these smaller point and shoots, I mean those can fit into your day-to-day workflow very, very easily.
Yeah, I can definitely vouch for that, because I actually started off doing immersive journalism as a freelancer. And the biggest barrier to entry that I found was the stitching. So one of my mentors who's in immersive journalism advised me to get a camera called the Nikon Keymission 360 that self-stitches, so you don't have to do that step. Because I think the biggest thing is just to get out there and try it out, to shoot and then edit. So all I had to do was get the Nikon Keymission 360 and then get Adobe Premiere CC with VR capabilities. And I basically bootstrapped the thing myself because I had no institutional backing as a freelancer. I went to experts to ask them questions. There were some really good YouTube video tutorials, but it's a matter of just experimenting, because there are really no rules in this field yet. So,
I would say don't get hang up on the equipment, and I would really advise you not to suddenly invest on buying 50 Keymission or 20 Omni, because the technology is evolving at such a rate that every single month something else is coming out. So my advice to you is just buy one thing, try it out, and if it doesn't work out, then just sort of like scale. So like the Ricoh Theta, right? Like when it first came out, everyone is super excited. And then it turns out that it's not that great for video. But it's really good for photo. So what do? Just pass that on to the photographers. Do more 360 photos. And then you sort of get the next great camera. So just be really agile about your equipment, because I think each month you see something new, right? So the way now we think about equipment is actually what kind of stories do you want to tell? And I think planning is definitely really important in terms of what is it that you plan to do. So do you want to do live streaming? Do you want to do these like one-off? Do you want to do something that's longer form, or do you want to do something that's episodic, right? Because based on how you want to approach the content, there's different type of equipment that makes sense. For example, the Instant 360 that you see here, so they have an Apple version and they have an Android version. They cost around $200 USD. And with the Instant 360, you could actually put that on your iPhone and live stream whatever event you're in.
Which we're doing right now. You're all live on Facebook right now.
So you could basically live stream this, and the quality is not super rich, but it's just good enough for someone to experience that, right? And because this new format is so nascent, good enough is just good enough.
Well, I think the audience is used to near enough is good enough, because of all the news clips now that are sourced from Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. That's where the breaking news comes now. So an equivalent resolution shot from a 360 camera is like, oh yeah, it's more important to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Users are so conditioned to watching just appalling quality video that even the lowest end of these cameras would be
totally.
I was at a conference last week, and Marcelle Hopkins from New York Times was there, and she was speaking, and she's the executive producer of all the 360 content that the New York Times produces, and they're producing 360 content one a day. They partnered with Samsung, so they're very much into the game. And she said, this is a direct quote, "None of us really know what we're doing." Do you feel the same way? Like, is that a challenge? Do you think that's one of the biggest challenges, that this is so nascent that everyone is still experimenting, but part of the experimentation is that it's going to enable innovation?
I think like what you say, that's the best part about it. Like we're all entering into this in a pretty similar level of knowledge and skill, and we learn from each other, and the rules are being written as we're out there making these things and as the audience gets used to them. So it's so exciting to be part of a whole new medium, a whole new platform in its newborn state, to continue the baby analogy, that it's like, why can you not be like excited and engaged about wanting to get your hands into it and find out your own, like, where you can take it yourself for your own applications, for your own audience?
I mean, you asked us earlier, what are some of the lessons? And so what we shared with you are some of the early lessons, but we're at the very, very beginning of this. It's like being at the beginning of the silent film era. It's quite literally like that. And so it's not too late to get involved in figuring this out, and it's not too much of a steep learning curve to get up to speed. But that's going to change very soon because all the companies that are the technology companies are putting out increasingly advanced devices. By the end of this year, you're going to see a lot of these features being incorporated right into phones. There are a couple of phones out right now that include the next generation of technology on the Google Tango, which actually does depth mapping of a space. So if you take a picture, ZT Axon is one of the cameras that's ready for it. If you take a photo, it doesn't just capture the image in the pixels, a flat image, it also captures the spatial information. And so all of a sudden, you now have a basic model, a 3D model that you can use. And I don't know if anyone was watching the announcements out of the Google I/O conference earlier this month, but they are really, really working hard on this, and you're going to see a lot changing over the next 2 to 3 years.
I mean, here's the great thing about 360 and VR now, because it's so nascent, where anytime there's a new technology that's being introduced, right now there is no expert. So the playing field is level. Right, so you actually have an opportunity to learn and actually get ahead of a piece of technology. And for the first time, I feel like journalism is not behind in technology, which is great because I think we are growing along with the platform, platform provider and also the device maker. Right, so this is one of the few instances where, in the modern era, that we have a way to shape how this platform and medium is going in ways that we didn't have during the, in the internet age, when everyone suddenly just like, what is this thing? And then, it's sort of like disrupt the business model, right? So this is actually your chance to come in and do something that basically none of us are claiming to be expert. We know some of the growing pains, but you could quickly learn to that and be part of the community. A great way to start is, the Online News Association, Google and Knight Foundation form a group called Journalism 360. You could find them on Medium. I'm on the advisory board, and where we're basically sharing every single piece of best practice and heartaches that we face. So it's a quick way for everyone to sort of learn, to see what kind of mistakes that people have been making, and we have been making plenty of mistakes. Right. And so that you could sort of adapt to it. And again, it just, don't think about this as, it's for some, 20-some-year-old that knows, like, coding. Like, at the AP, some of our best 360 experiences from veteran photographers. Like, they really able to tell stories in ways that we haven't imagined before. And I think one of the things I point out to in a story where I say, 360 allow us to reimagine the stories that we've been telling every single day differently in ways that's more exciting. I mean, think about the same festival that you have to, tell, or the same protest that you've been doing. With this format, suddenly you're able to have a different sense of engagement right? A different set of storytelling. So I think that's the excitement.
And I'm also on the Journalism 360 Advisory Board. You can also follow on Twitter at journalism_360. And later this year, we're going to be doing some training sessions at various conferences and so on. We just actually wrapped up the first $250,000 funding round for immersive journalism projects. And so that announcement should be coming out in June as to who the first projects getting seed funding will be.
So let's talk a little bit about viability and how, in terms of, organizations getting into 360, and I guess, we have to talk about monetization, because monetization is obviously, part of what we do. So, we've seen a lot of organizations, I'll use the New York Times again as one where they partnered with Samsung. They delivered a million Google Cardboard headsets to their subscriber base. Is that where news organizations need to look at partnerships to get into that game, to make it truly viable as a medium and make it sustainable?
It's a challenge, In my industry, newspapers, it's a lot of industry financial pressure, so trying to make things monetarily viable is nice. We're not in a position to monetize our own 360 content. We publish it on social platforms. We don't have our own native player. Ideally, at some point in the future, we would have a native player, and then you start to get to some traditional advertising models of display ads. When Reuters had launched its 360 program, they were backed by Samsung as well. Those kind of partnerships, I think, is, in the short term, the most likely way to get bootstrapped if you want to do anything above just buying your own camera. That's what we do at the Globe. We actually use my personal Gear 360. I'm like the 360 champion that we have on staff, because the more traditional pre-roll ad or mid-roll ad just isn't going to work on a 360 format. And if it does, if you try to squeeze a 360 ad at the top of a 360 video, I think it's just going to turn the audience off completely. People don't like ads in the first place. People don't like pre-roll ads anyway. And then to have a headset on, or to be looking in a portal viewer on a phone or something, to have a 360 ad slammed at you is just going to turn people off even more quickly.
Potentially, yeah.
I work with a lot of different news organizations, and almost universally, they are funding their VR and 360 efforts through partnerships, because that's where the money is. It's essentially sponsored content model. And it would be great to see more organizations not waiting for those partnerships and actually investing in their staff and in the training in particular, just so that they're ready when this actually does get really big. And I'm really hesitant to make predictions, but I would say that next year, 2018, is when the general public is going to become broadly aware of VR and immersive content, just because there are a bunch of entertainment properties that are going to be pushing out just general consumer experiences. So there's the Ready Player One film by Steven Spielberg, which is going to be huge. Every major TV network has a VR-themed TV series queued up for 2018. And toward the end of this year and throughout next year, all the major technology developers are going to be debuting new and improved headsets. So I would expect by holiday 2019, you're going to be seeing a lot more uptake, and by 2020, we'll be sort of at that baseline level where the general public is aware and ready to engage in a big way with immersive experiences.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the areas that, to make it truly viable, is that for the general public, one of the things you hear a lot about is VR the next 3D TV. 3D TV didn't succeed because people hated putting on glasses in their living rooms. So when does it get to that point that are we past that point? Do we think that VR is not going to be in that same space? That it has more life than the 3D TV example?
I mean, I think so, because for the fact that you could still get some kind of experience with your phone, right? So think about, when you purchase a new phone, it comes with a box, right? Who's to say that the next generation of phones, that when you get this box will be a Google Cardboard? Does anyone remember, like, some of you might be too young, the Mattel Viewmaster, like the thing? So the new generation of Mattel Viewmaster is basically they even rebranded it as like a Mattel VR Viewmaster, right? So when we think about viability, I think it's the wrong question to ask, what is the viability right now, right? It's the same questions that publishers ran into in the 90s, is what is this internet, right? It has no business model, so we don't need to be in it. And what happened? Someone else came in and disrupted the model, and now who's in control of that business model? Not the publishing company, right? So if we really want to have some sort of direction of figure out how to monetize it, then we need to have some skin in the game, right? If we can't have the audience coming to, our format to view our content, that's the best way to ensure there's some way of monetizing, right? By saying that, look, we have this amount of audience coming and viewing these content, and now we have a way of dictating what that monetization is. If we wait for someone else to say, hey, here's how you monetize, this content, then I think we'd be too late. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just really about, we're smarter this time in terms of getting ahead of adapting to the technology from a storytelling perspective. There's also time for us to be aggressive in terms of adapting to a new business model in a way that we don't have to wait for someone else to come up with that. Like, we could be the one who could come up with it.
Yeah. And the cost right now for getting into the basics of production is pretty negligible, right? It's not like you don't need to throw down $50,000 to be able to produce a few 360 videos, right? I mean, you can get a kit together and get out and shoot for a few $100s. Like, that's a really, really low barrier for entry, right? So I would argue that, yes, monetization right now, basically everything's being underwritten by the technology companies at this point in time. If you want to do a complex project that involves a lot of moving parts and is really advanced, then there's going to be some money that needs to go into that, and you're probably going to want to look at getting some funding from a tech company, and they're pretty willing to do that. One of the things the tech companies are really keen on is they want to make this stuff work, and they know that the only way this stuff works is if there's good content. And one of the things that news is known for providing a lot of is content. We're kind of awash in the stuff, right? And they know, we've spoken with a lot of tech companies, and they say, like, they really value the fact that news provides a broad range of content. It's generally got a very high quality. It's not like a bunch of people jumping out of planes with GoPro strapped on their heads, or like there's only so many mountain biking experiences you can do. So on that end of things, if you want to go a little bit bigger, there's definitely funding models for that. But as far as getting started, as far as getting familiar with the tools, the technology, with the storytelling, with the potential for what you might do with it, the barrier to entry for that is so low that I don't even think monetization should really factor into that.
I mean,
I think Nathan makes some great points, and yes, the barrier to entry is very low, but I'm a bit concerned about what happens once the market is seeded and once the big companies say, we don't need you anymore, and then where do we end up? When Samsung is like, there's enough headsets in the market, when Facebook can implement Rift properly in its platform, and they'll just storm ahead in the ways they've already done with using their platform to share the content that we make. Like, I see that the future is bright for the content, but I'm a bit pessimistic about how the monetization may work out, and how much our ownership of it as creators will retain in our hands.
I talk to a lot of technology companies, and a common theme that I keep on hearing is that the news industry in particular is not making the same kinds of innovations that they're seeing on the entertainment side. And it's really, really important for us as news people to make sure that journalism is a part of this part of defining this new experience, this new thing, because if we don't, it will be primarily defined as entertainment, and the kinds of decisions that get made on the directions that the technology takes, where funding goes, it will follow that path. And I look at this and see this as the next internet, really. And if we miss the boat on this, our organizations don't have the war chest of cash in the bank that we did in the late 80s and early 90s. And it could potentially have catastrophic effects for our industry.
Yeah, I totally want to echo Saleem's comments, because we're the next couple of years is really going to define the path and the adoption rate of VR, because we need to ensure that we have quality content that's accessible to people, and that quality content gets them curious enough to adopt, upgrade their hardware into something that's more optimized for immersive experiences. And then as a result, there's going to be more people who are willing, more content creators who are willing to purchase the hardware. There's going to be more great hardware that costs less for people to purchase as well. So it's just going to grow the industry as a result.
And to speak directly to the monetization, actually WorldPay just created a new in-VR payment system that they're testing now. So, the money part will figure itself out. We don't have to come up with a mechanism for that. The financial companies and institutions, they're on it.
Yeah, Facebook will just take it all.
Yeah, I mean, I would think about one thing that we hear consistently is quality content, right? So whether we're talking to Oculus, Google, or Facebook, part of the message is we don't have enough quality content. Why are they coming to news company, right? They didn't have to come to us. They could go directly to entertainment. Is they want people to use this, right? Who are the people in a position to create consistent content, right? A movie doesn't come out every day, right? Like, it costs lots and lots of money to produce a movie. But news comes out every single day. It comes out practically every single minute, right? We know how to tell a story and be able to turn it around and make it consistent. So part of the challenge right now, part of the riddle right now, I think with 360 is how do we get people to come back again and again and again, right? It's not a challenge that's unique to news. It's actually a challenge that's unique to this particular platform. What will compel you to say, hey, let me stop what I'm doing each day, like you go into the gym, like let me put on this headset and absorb that content. So, and what kind of content will give you the hook to come back and watch it again, much like your Netflix and your DVR, right? So I think that's the problem that we have. If we were able to solve this particular problem, which everyone is, right, then that's where the path to monetization is. Just two small example. So Google is working on, they have this education product called Google Expeditions. Right, what is it? They basically partner with elementary, I think middle schools and high schools, where they provide these 360 platform where the teacher will do history and current events lesson in 360, right? So when we think about why 360 now, don't think about the type of audience that we have right now, right? Think about the people who are using Mattel, the new generation of Mattel Viewmaster, and the folks who's coming up through elementary school. If your kids is expecting all the content to be 360 at one point, just like right now we expect things to move like a video, right? We expect photographs to have color. At some point, their expectation is that content should be 360, right? Do you really want to wait for that expectation to come and then learn how to create content for that platform, or do you want to actually master that medium now? And when that expectation meets and you are in control of the assets that you have.
Don't worry about the technology of headsets and so on. It's like that's going to be normal in a few years, and it'll be much smaller. Microsoft just came out, just demonstrated a new prototype that looks like a pair of regular eyeglasses. And if anyone, some people in this room might be old enough to remember when the Sony Walkman first came out, it was really weird to see people walking around with this box and headphones on everywhere, and now everybody has earphones on everywhere you go. So that'll just become part of the culture.
We only have a couple minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience?
I guess you're talking about, we need to not be afraid of it if things are happening in the future. I would love to hear some examples of how you're using it now
maybe in our case, it's on a case-by-case basis. If a story comes up that we think is worth doing in that platform, then we'll do that at the expense of doing it in other visual platforms. Once every couple of months is probably our interval. Like, we don't try and force it. We publish something this week. There's something that's probably we'll shoot next week. So it's as the story comes up for us. And we've found that things that are experiential, to get back to what we were saying about taking people somewhere, is what has engaged best with our audience. They're simple. They can watch it without the sound. If they're watching it on Facebook, for example, our most popular 360 video was a ferry trip from the mainland to the island last summer. And people were commenting on Facebook that they loved being able to take the ferry ride from their desk. Just a cute little aside. Like, it took no time to shoot, no time to edit. It's just like, let's think of something fun to do. And the thing we did earlier this week was a sneak peek of this new Canadian History Museum in Gatineau. So it's a similar experience what you would have if you were an attendee to the museum, where you could stop and look at the various installations. So that's where we kind of fall, and we find those experiential things are really easy to shoot, really easy to turn around. That's one other post-production point is we find the editing is very, very quick. To edit together a minute, 10-minute-ish worth of 360 footage takes like 20 minutes. Yeah. And the shots are generally longer, so you don't need as many shots, because you need to give people that time to pan around and try and take in the scene. Maybe other guys have got other examples from your experiences?
Yeah, sure. So for 360 video and live 360 video, I found it's best for breaking news events and also mass public events like protests, because it really immerses you and kind of conveys like the energy. That's what I found personally. And also I found that I've seen a lot of good VR documentaries, but some not so good ones that kind of there's no purpose to the shot and it doesn't drive the narrative forward. So for example, in a lot of traditional videos, you see kind of like an interview shot with somebody, but it's in their living room or something. That doesn't work as well, I find, for VR, because if there's no reason for a user to scroll around in that room, if it doesn't drive the narrative forward in any way, I don't really see that as a good use of VR. So it's kind of just thinking about, I think most of the work happens in pre-production or pre-shooting, where you're really thinking critically about whether the setting that you're choosing to shoot in is, will move the story forward in some way.
Can I ask you a question, Anita, just to hijack the room? Have you had any experiences with shooting a protest where people are weird or uncomfortable about, or they don't understand what's going on when they see a 360 camera amongst the protesters?
Not in a protest setting, but I have in a public setting, and it is weird because you definitely have to. I've had to hide from the camera because obviously I don't want to be in the shot. So it's kind of like, but the app that I have actually shows what I'm shooting, and people definitely are like curious about it. But I actually haven't had any issues with that yet. But maybe I'm guessing you want to share something.
No, I haven't actually. But yeah, you do. It is something weird. It attracts attention because it is something that's different.
Yeah, for sure.
By the way, it's okay for you to be in the shot. It's not the end of the world if you're in it. I mean, it's a 360 camera. You can't really run away from it.
People know people are operating them.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that because I think right now a lot of people say, what kind of story makes sense? Rather than being really prescriptive about like, oh, you have to do like a hot air balloon ride, think about the format, right? It's really about that intimacy. What makes a good experience if you were to experience this by yourself, right? Like, whether it's breaking news scenario or a trip, like what makes a very pleasant journey if it's just you and the world, right? So it could be anything from heartbreaking to really delightful moments. So I think it's sort of like what will either make you smile or cry or be fearful, like if you were alone facing this experience.
Yeah, so at AP we're doing about 2 to 4 videos a week. We've been doing that for about the last 6 months or so. We bought a bunch of these kind of point-and-shoot cameras and shipped them out, and basically reporters will pitch us in stories. They'll say, we're going to do a story on X, and I think this would be a really great opportunity to do 360. So we did one on like this new concert theater that opened up in Tokyo. It was a brand new design concert theater. It was a full package. We had text videos, flat traditional video. So very often we'll add 360 as a component of that, because typically one of the photogs or VJs who will be going out to shoot will also have the camera and will be interested in shooting that. And then we can use that material on Facebook, YouTube, whatever, Twitter, as some kind of additional, we'll typically link back to the story or a video package as well as putting that on. We'll they'll pitch it, it'll be a story that's just 360. I think what was one that a reporter wanted to go to an elephant sanctuary in Thailand. He got amazing shots of up close with elephants. It was fantastic. It was really great. So sometimes it'll just be a story that, maybe on its own would be kind of done before. I think, Paul, you were saying, like, basically every old story is new again, So maybe it's a story that you wouldn't necessarily cover, or would only get like a short blurb or something like that, but could actually make for a really interesting 360. So we'll approach it that way.
We're over time, but no one's kicked us out yet. So does anybody else have any other questions?
Can I just weigh in on that just briefly? So one of the main things to think about here is that this is the power of this is the ability to do something unconventional. So don't just think about shooting 360 video. There's also, I'm going to sort of go off of the video for a moment and talk about constructed experiences, because my first experience working in immersive was doing real-time 3D data visualization in the 90s. And now you can do that on your phone. And there's new technologies that are open source, like WebVR, that are going to enable you to create really interesting 3D immersive graphics. So it's not just about the video. Think beyond just what's around you, but think about the story and think about what you're trying to achieve, and focus on what the best way is to tell that story and get that across.
Jenny?
We will have to integrate a new video player into our CMS to publish it natively on our site. What we currently do is publish it to Facebook, Vimeo. Thankfully, they finally added 360 support, and YouTube. And then we typically embed the Facebook player, just because you can control the perspective hot points on that. And then we follow the metrics on how it performs on Facebook.
That's going to be native in the browser probably by the end of this year or early next year. Every browser is building in that capability.
You might check out Aura, O-R-A-H, I think. We've got a pretty nice camera, and it has stereoscopic, not stereoscopic,
binaural?
spatial audio, yeah, thank
Spatial,
you, that's
yeah.
the word I'm looking for. It's got spatial audio built in, and it runs out to a box. The camera runs out to a box, so you get
It auto stitches and
auto stitches, yeah.
And Sennheiser has some great microphones for that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of. I think Sennheiser just launched it, like a positional audio recorder. So you can pair that with your shots.
Actually, a headset as well, so you can just plug it into your phone and record spatial audio off your phone.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm with radio, and I feel like such a lag in these. But I feel as though I need to get, I have to do both things now. I have to do radio and try to get stuff online as well.
Do you have a 360 camera in your studio?
Pardon me?
Do you have a 360 camera in your studio? Do you do that kind of programming, or are you like in the field?
Go out in the field, right, to do stories. I mean, it's funny how strongly I was getting images of stories that I've been out on as a radio reporter. And the thought of being able to take a camera, like I'll never forget going to Jilly's Hotel.
None of us will forget Julie's.
It had been carved up into rooms that people could rent for, window went from the floor almost all the way up to the ceiling. But the room was, it was a couple of lengths bigger than the table, right, with that kind of ceiling. And I remember sitting down at the guy's bed and lost underneath this high ceiling. And there was a can of bed bug spray right by his bed.
They good one.
As you were talking about it, I thought, wow, you don't have to jump out of a balloon. Or
No.
out of a
Yep.
balloon. You don't have to go on a hot.
That's the kind of detail that a 360 image can capture that you wouldn't necessarily have in a story.
I've got the high sign a bunch of times, so my apologies. Thank you very much to the panel. It's a great conversation. Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.
everybody.